Welcome and thank you all for joining us for our opening reception. A Call to Peace is a public art initiative curated by Newark Art Justices Salamisha Tillett, Monument Labs Paul Farber, and Assistant Curator Aaliyah Allen. This exhibition focuses on spotlighting underrepresented veterans, engaging legacies of Confederate statues, and addressing the relationship between public spaces and historical memory through temporary monuments and artworks by Manuel Acevedo. Where's Manuel? Shakaya Booker. Sonia Clark, and Jamel Shabazz. In her essay, The Site of Memory, literary genius Toni Morrison speaks of remembering as a rush of imagination. She says, the act of imagination is bound up with memory. You know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it has a perfect memory. It is not flooding, it is remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that, remembering where we were, what valley we ran through, what the banks were like, the light that was there, the route back to our original place. It is emotional memory, what the nerves and the skin remember, as well as how it appeared. And a rush of the imagination is our flooding. She also famously said, the function of art is to free someone else. And so likewise, with this initiative, we are being called to remember the history of war, of the Confederacy, and to center our stories. It's a good time to flood our imaginations with memory and visions of the future, to use art to think critically, thoughtfully, and creatively about history, representation, our communities, our arts, and the world around us. Many artists are responding to the idea of reimagining new monuments, including artists like Wangechi Mutu, Kehinde Wiley, Simone Leigh, and Kara Walker, to name a few. What memories are important to us? What is the role of public art? And what monuments can we collectively imagine for our city? Alongside the artist's installations, we have a research engagement lab in Military Park, staffed by Newark-based artists and educators, where passersby will be invited to contribute their own speculative monument proposals, which Aaliyah Allen will explain further in the program. Today, we'll talk a bit about the complex history of Military Park and the history of art and activism in Newark with our Honorable Mayor, Raj J. Baraka. Where's our mayor? Hi, Mayor. And Executive Director of the Newark Museum, Linda Harrison. Here in Express Newark, you can also view works from the exhibition by Sonia Clark and Jamel Shabazz, and we encourage you over the next few weeks to join us for our weekly monumental conversations that we are presenting in collaboration with artists, curators, scholars, and historians. We begin with a conversation, the dignity of knowing what city you're in, and we thank you all again for joining us. Now I'd like to introduce the curators who will share a statement, curatorial statement about our program. Salamisha Tillett is the Henry Rutgers Professor of African American and African Studies and Creative Writing, Associate Director of the Clement Price Institute at Rutgers Newark, founding faculty director of New Arts Justice Initiative at Express Newark, and co-founder of A Long Walk Home. She is granddaughter of Newark. She is a much sought after commentator on the politics of artistic expression and a leading thinker on the relationship between art and social justice. She's also working on 2 books that will be released shortly, one on the iconic Nina Simone and another on Alice Walker. She also has a book that's called Sites of Slavery, Citizenship and Racial Democracy in the Post-Civil Rights Imagination, which examines how contemporary African-American artists, writers, and intellectuals remember antebellum slavery within post-civil rights America in order to challenge the ongoing exclusion of African Americans from America's civic myths and to model a racially democratic future. Thank you for this project, Salamisha, for bringing this to Newark. Paul Farber from Monument Lab is a PhD, curator, historian, and educator. He is an artistic director and co-founder of Monument Lab and curator in residence for New Arts Justice at Express Newark. He is author of forthcoming A Wall of Our Own, An American History of the Berlin Wall. Salamisha.
So we're going to be really quick because we would like to get to the conversation as soon as possible. But before we engage in lively dialogue about monuments and race and art and activism, I'd like to thank a couple of people, and Paul would like to thank a few people as well. So first, this exhibition has been made possible by the generous support of the School of Arts and Sciences here at Rutgers University Newark, as well as for Third Space grants from Express Newark and the Cultural Programming Grant from Rutgers University Newark. In the early days when we were imagining what we would like to do, we knew that we didn't necessarily need permission, but we would like to do this in good spirit and good faith. And so our project partners were key in making this exhibition possible. Mayor Ras Baraka and the city of Newark. We traveled in November to visit him, and he was so generous and so kind. The Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience, Rutgers University Newark Departments of African American Studies and Creative Writing, Express Newark, the Institute for Jazz Studies, the John Cotton Dana Library, Military Park, Monument Lab, as you know, is obviously here, Newark Arts Festival, New Arts Justice, the Newark Museum, Paul Robeson Galleries, Project for Empty Space, and the Shine Portrait Studio.
It does take a village for us to get in one part to the finish line, but actually it's a starting point of this exhibition. And now with all of you here, it makes it possible to think about public art and monuments more fully. I want to thank a number of individuals, and of course, just start with our family and our friends. Some of the family members you may see join us here at the podium, and others are in the room with us. We have an amazing team that comprises Monument Lab and New Arts Justice. And that includes Aaliyah Allen, who deserves an immense round of applause. Brilliant and diligent, Fayemi Shakur. We have new members of our lab research team, artists and educators from Newark. They are around the room collecting monument proposals. That includes Deanna Diaz, Sydney Johnson, Gabe Ribeiro, and Jillian M. Rock. If you are here, can you wave your clipboards in the air or your hands? And then finally, strategy and operations, Laura Troiano, public history research partner, Mark Krasovich, research director, Lori Allen, design, William Roy Hodgson, and interns, Claire Fisher, Maceo Gaines, and Curtis Klein. We had a very thoughtful and focused advisory board who gave insight, who gave tips, who gave words of wisdom and guidance and just that extra momentum, and that includes Mayor Ras Baraka, the city of Newark, Fran Bartkowski, Rutgers Newark, Chair, Department of Arts, Culture, and Media. Ananda Bell, Rutgers Newark, Director and Chief Curator of Paul Robeson Galleries. Tricia Bloom, Curator of American Art at the Newark Museum. Victor Davson, Rutgers Newark, Co-Director of Express Newark. Anne Englot, Rutgers Newark, Co-Director of Express Newark. Peter Englot, Rutgers Newark, Senior Vice Chancellor for Public Affairs and Chief of Staff. Rebecca Jampol, Co-Founder and Co-Director of Project for Empty Space. Jeremy Johnson, Director, Newark Arts Festival. Mark Krasovich, Rutgers Newark, American Studies and History. Nick Klein, Rutgers Newark, Director of the Shine Portrait Studio. Jessica Sechrist, Park Manager of Military Park Partnerships. And Jasmine Wall, Co-Founder and Co-Director, Jasmine Wahi, Co-Founder and Co-Director, Project for Empty Space. There are many others who are worthy of praise. Some of their names are in the newspaper, but really, before we can get started, we have to extend that gratitude to that circle of collaborators.
And again, just like to thank family and friends, and particularly people like Seneca and Sydney, who are very instrumental to the vision of this project and the future of Newark. So I just want to shout them out. I think we just want to say brief words about the project at large, and then I think we should move on to the conversation and then do artist comments after that. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Seneca. She has artist shirt on right now, so she's in the spirit. So when I came, I'm not new to Newark by any stretch of the imagination, but I am new to Rutgers Newark. And so I became a faculty member here last year, and the first person I wanted to be in collaboration with and bring from Philadelphia to Newark with me was Paul Farber and Monument Lab in particular. And we both came to Borglum in different ways. You know, if you live in Newark or spend time in Newark, you may pass by Military Park, you may understand or see this enormous statue, but I, for one, was not very interested in the history because I just kind of passed by like a regular person. And then we started to unpack and unlearn the massive history behind Wars of America, the monument that's next door to us. And so as we began to understand that he was working he's famous for Mount Rushmore, that he was working on Stone Mountain, the Confederate Memorial in Georgia, that he was affiliated with the Klan, that this monument, in fact, is not necessarily completely a monument that's praising war, but actually shows the toll of wars on families and individuals, and yet at the same time, it has a very homogeneous look in terms of the racial makeup of the people. It's a very complex monument. It's fraught, it's vexed, and it has a lot going on. And so it's the kind of monument that allows you to kind of engage it, but also when you ask artists, as we did, what's a timely monument for Newark today, essentially, it's a monument that opens up conversation, and it's a monument that you can engage in really provocative and kind of infectious ways. And I think the artists that we have asked to participate in this project, and for you all are supposed to participate as well, and draw and sketch and design your own monuments. It's pretty amazing. So I just want to say that's why we chose this monument at this moment. This is why we chose this exhibition. And then the term itself, A Call to Peace, I'll just say very, very quickly. There are three invocations that we were playing with here. One, when Borglum created the statue, the preamble, he said, was a call to arms. Two, one of the earliest newspapers in the country that was based here in Newark was called The Call. And three, Mary Baraka's Call to Black People, right? So these are the three calls that we're trying to play with, engage, invoke as we are imagining a call to peace.
Monuments around the country and around the world are being questioned. There's a reckoning going on. And in large part, that's a reckoning that's a long time coming. That's a long time fought for. It did not start over the last 2 years with the dismantling of Confederate monuments and other problematic statues, because for generations, artists, activists, students have been calling attention to the way that symbols and systems are connected. And specifically those systems of racial injustice, gender injustice, the fallout and legacies of colonial exploitation. And what we found time and again in our work is that if you have the time, the money, and the power to build a monument to something that's important to you, you would do it. But if you don't have the time, the money, and the power, you stand next to a monument that exists and you amplify your presence and make your voice heard. And you do it with other people. We've seen it with Occupy Wall Street. We've seen it with Black Lives Matter. We've seen it with feminist, queer, environmental organizing. And for us in this exhibition, we approach it as researchers, as artists, as curators, but also really curious. We think that the monuments that we've inherited from the past tell a small sliver of the stories about us. And in order to answer what's next, especially here in Newark, we have to ask that question out loud and with other people. So that question that you'll be hearing throughout the fall from today through Veterans Day is, what is a timely monument for Newark? And how do you measure timely? Is it timely because it's for today? Is it timely because it's dealing with the past? Or is it timely because we're shaping our values and our visions for the future? That's up for all of us to take on individually. I've had the great pleasure and honor of working closely with Salamisha as a friend, a mentor. I had to invent the word friendtor properly. And when I was co-founding Monument Lab with Ken Lum and other colleagues in Philadelphia, we turned to Salamisha's writing, Salamisha's words, her presence as an early speaker and a person who interviewed Hank Willis Thomas, Black Thought, in City Hall courtyard. It was an immense honor and a high bar of responsibility too to come here for over the last year to be working together as co-curators. And now the project's ready. It's open. We've had 4 amazing artists start to answer that question in public. We wanted to gather outside. We will invite you to come on a walking tour with us after this festivity here. We just didn't want you sitting in the cold, having your cotton candy and popcorn get rained on. But we're ready to be outside with you this fall. And those artworks are there as ways to invite us into something we all have the power to do, which is to be aware of our city, to ask questions of our city, and to rewrite and reimagine what's possible. The monuments that we've inherited from the past, we have to figure out ways to live with and also unearth that next generation of monuments.
Thank you. So I'm gonna call audible here, and what we're gonna do is, I think, start the conversation, and then we're gonna have Marcia, we would like to. Marcia and Ann and Victor speak afterwards, as well as Manuel, and then Aaliyah. So you don't know the program order, but the people who are supposed to speak know the program order, so I'm saying it for them as much as for us. So is that fine? We can do the conversation with, Paul's gonna be moderating it, and I'm really happy that everyone said yes. So thank you all. So Linda Harrison and Mayor Ras Baraka and I will be in conversation. Paul will moderate. Then we'll go to you, Marcia Brown, who's our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Vice Chancellor, and Ann and Victor, and then Aaliyah. I think that's the program. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and Manuel, and then Aaliyah. Okay. So I'm going to go change hats for a second. I always moderate, so I'm very happy not to moderate right now.
Each week throughout the exhibition, every Thursday out in Military Park, we'll be having monumental conversations, which is a pairing or a grouping of 2 or 3 people who are already doing the work around questioning monuments, memory, public spaces. And we wanted to kick off today with a very special panel and thinking about the intersections of art and activism. We've heard introductions earlier from this panel, but again, we are joined here by Director of the Newark Museum, Linda Harrison. Mayor Ras Baraka. And co-curator, Salamisha Tillet. I want to start off with the big question that's being asked to everybody and anybody, which is, what is a timely monument for Newark? And just to hear from each of you, whether you have had an idea for many years and this is a chance to speak it, or maybe just more perspectives on the way you or others might answer that question. What is a timely monument for Newark?
Okay. The museum leader will begin. I have to say that for a long time, I was just walking past the monuments because as an African-American woman just walking through the world, it was quite a while ago that I decided that the monuments were not really significant to me, most of them. And so then you kind of get into the habit, or I got into the habit of seeing but not really going deep into what that monument represented, because it seemed to always represent something that was very painful towards me or a culture or people that I knew. And then we fast forward, and looking at monuments, I realized that all of a sudden I was channeling my grandmother, and I started getting angry. And once you get angry, then you start, you must be part of the solution to how do you resolve a situation like this. And that's when I started thinking about just the breadth of monuments that were sharing a very small portion of what the stories were about or are about at this time, whether it's veterans or any other subject matter. And that started me thinking that there was a lot of work for us to do, and that monuments now, if we have this opportunity to reimagine what the monuments are, then we must tell the stories of the diasporas that have been misrepresented. And that may not just be one diaspora, that's the Black diaspora, the Portuguese diaspora, the Afro-Asian diaspora. And so would one monument be represented? It may be very different. And if we combine that with a contemporary definition of art, it may not look like the traditional monument that we have seen over the last couple of 100 years.
So I would say, art and history converges, right? So, like, there is no timely piece of art, only timeless, right? So it's a difference in my mind. Art is emotion, right? And so those monuments to me are art, and art has use, and there's a very specific use and intent of those monuments, or whatever it is that people put up. So buildings are also monuments, right? And other things that people create in terms of architecture are also monuments. And a monument to who? Like the idea of what the monument is. It is a monument, an appraisal, a praise to who? Like, who are you, memorializing here? Like, what are we doing here? What are we saying about this piece? So art is greater than just aesthetic, right? People didn't just put things up to look at it, right? Those things represent things throughout time. And there's a way to tell the history of the people of this community in a converging way. All of these people met, right? So we don't have to have these separate things. These people met. We met here in Newark. Most people came here in this space looking for something, right? Most people looking for a better life, greater jobs, more opportunity, whether they came from Europe or the Caribbean or from South Carolina fleeing the Klan and the boll weevil, right? So there's different reasons that we came here, but we all converged in this space, and we're afraid to tell that story of our convergence, right? Of our meeting, because our meeting is not always nice, right? And in some instances, it created things that would not have existed unless we met, right? It created cultures, languages, opportunities, things that would not be here unless we had this meeting in history. And I think a monument that's honest about what's going on, what went on, just not just historically, but in the present sense and a future sense. So when you say, should it be past, present, or future, I think it should be all three. Like the art itself should represent all three of those spaces. There's no, the best art can live in any space in any time, right? So, and I think that is incredibly important. I think those monuments were put up, as we see, for a very, very, very specific purpose, right? A very specific reason why people are attaching themselves to them, and in some instances don't even know why they're attaching themselves to them, because it represents something to them, the supremacy of something that existed that they want to continue, right? And us creating art against that space is saying now that that era is done, is over, is not useful. It's not even useful to the people who thought it was useful to them then. It's not even useful anymore. So that's why, as an artist, as the mayor, as an educator, I think all of those things, to me, are very, very important, and we should be very thoughtful about what it is that we create. And there's a way to represent us all without separating us.
Yeah, I'll just answer really quickly. Those are great, really thought-provoking answers. I like the idea of monuments being temporary. Manuel earlier talked about ephemerality, and he's doing a performance next Friday at 12 in Military Park called The Happening, specifically called Cam Up, where he's taking over the monument. And so I just, Lyotard talked about petite narratives, right? Like there's a grand narrative of history, and then there are these little stories. And I think the truth lies in the little stories, or the democracy that we have are in the small stories that are us coming together, not always in the happiest, harmonious way, but sometimes in contestation and conflict. So the idea of like prototypical or prototype monuments, small monuments responding to maybe a larger one, but as many voices and as many articulations of the past and the present as possible are interesting to me. And they don't have to be permanent, right? And they don't even have to be a month long. They could in fact be a day, right? So that how we are engaging the time and how we're engaging history has everything to do with how we would like our identities to be seen in the present. So that's the answer. I mean, just many monuments, and they don't have to be permanent.
As we switch out a chair, I'm going to ask another question.
I thought what was going on. I was like, what is happening? Okay. I was like rushing my answer because I thought we had no time left.
We're
Okay.
So just to to pick up on Mayor Baraka's notion of convergence. I want to talk a little bit about the convergence of art and activism in each of your work, and also to just put it in the context of also the question of power. Each of you have, in some ways, inherited a place of power in the city that you are also putting your own imprints on, and whether that be the Price Institute, the Newark Museum, or City Hall. How do you think about that convergence of art and activism, and how you operate in a space of power that you're receiving and also making anew in your own ways?
Well, I think this is the time that we must use our power, that we cannot hide behind political correctness, and particularly with museums. Museums have traditionally been in the role of we tell you what to think, we put something on a wall, and if you don't think of it in this way properly, then you can go somewhere else. We can't be that museum anymore. And we can't be the museum that does not really now look at being a social justice place. This is something that museums traditionally step away from. Thank you. As a modern museum, we must be about social justice. We must be about correcting the canon. And so there is no way that we can move through doing the work of presenting art and culture without thinking of social justice, equality, empathy. And we must tell these stories that may be a little dangerous for some people who supported our museums in the very traditional way, because it's much like the monument. The traditional support of, we have a museum here in our town that's 110 years old, and we have collections that have been paid for by wealthy folks over a period of time who have been influencers, and now there are new influencers. And for us to even dare to think that curators can listen to the public and respond, as opposed to go into a room and we come up with whatever it is that we want to come up with, and you may or may not understand it, those days are over. And this is something where we must be bold in our approach to telling the underrepresented stories, not just at an event, not just this is the month for Black people and this is the month for Indians. We must really break all of that down, because our identity is often multiple versions of it. It's a convergence of those identities really in one person. And so we must actively tell these stories, and we have to be bold about it and feel that we will have the support and the financial support to tell those. But this is I think I'm bringing it back to the circle that you can't be a museum leader today and not fight for the correction of the canon of the stories that have been told by organizations like a museum that is considered a safe place, a trusting place, and we must use that power in order to educate and support new thinking and new artists.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't know if we wanted to go same. I'll just say that I guess I feel like for me, art and activism are so married to each other that I actually don't know any other way of thinking about one without the other. And to Mayor Baraka's point and to Linda's point, like art always has a politics attached to it, right? Like I hate when people say art for art's sake. No, that's a kind of conservative value system that we're exporting to other people. So since I believe that art not only is a site of human connection and human expression, but can really be fundamental to social justice organizing, I can't separate the two. And I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a household with a mother who's a musician where art mattered so much, to be a sister to a photographer, and to be a writer myself. And so I'm obsessed with this question. And for me, the more fundamental question is like, how do we get art, if we believe that art is this kind of entry point for people to become social justice agents, right? Like you can't imagine the civil rights movement without art. You can't imagine the Black Power movement without art. You can't imagine AIDS organizing in the 80s without art. All of these, can't imagine Black Lives Matter without art. You can't even imagine Me Too, right? So all of these, the importance of narrative, the importance of storytelling, and the importance of people coming together under something in which they may not necessarily know is their shared connection, but art provides that as like a basis for commonality and convergence, I think is just really powerful. What's unfortunate is that we don't trust artists enough. I feel like artists have all the answers, right? Like policymakers and legal experts always follow the artists. The artists are way ahead. Not only are they diagnosing the problem, but they've already come up with 5 or 6 solutions for our problems. So my role as an administrator and as an artist and as a critic is to get us to pay attention to the visions of artists, and particularly those who are already the most marginalized, have more answers than everyone else. The ones who we overlook have already solved and fixed our democracy. So that's my goal, I think, and I feel like everything I do and breathe and study and articulate is some version of this art activist commonality, coming together. I'm at the hyphen.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my father used to say, well, one is close, the noblest function of art is to oppose what is ugly. Right. So, and I think that is at the base of it, right? So, I mean, that's really fundamentally what we're saying when we say art and activism. The flip of that is, at Howard University, in communications class, historically one of the greatest films that they tell you is one of the greatest films in American history is The Birth of a Nation. Right, so they put D.W. Griffith before you and say The Birth of a Nation, one of the greatest films ever made. This is a terribly ugly film, right? A film that was designed to use art to uphold white supremacy, right, and drive you back into slavery. That was the point of it. But it also was looked at as aesthetically sound and superior. And so I think that divorces us, or that kind of, it's the same people who, you know, like war so much they call their literary tradition a canon. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it is like fighting that dichotomy, that thing that we grow up in and learn and educated in, that space. They're telling us to separate, you know, our political views from art, that we should like the movie even though it's ugly, right? And so our art should always be designed, a real art in my mind is designed to oppose the ugliness of the things that are happening, right? To make the world beautiful, right? And the problem is we have not a consensus yet on what beautiful is, right? Because some people think oppression might be beautiful to them. So we those of us who understand or have a kind of notion of what we think beauty is collectively, we have to paint our pictures, tell our stories, right? Put our photographs up, develop our monuments to show the world what's beauty. And I tend to believe that the majority of the world agrees with most of us about what beautiful is, right? Despite all of the stuff that people are telling them, they know that poverty is ugly, that unemployment is ugly, that suffering and starvation is ugly. They know all of those things. And so art is designed to oppose those things, in my mind. And I believe anything you do well becomes art, right? So art is the application of science. So whatever you're doing, if you do it so well. I mean, Darryl Dawkins dribbled the ball so well, he flew through the air so well, and he began to dunk the ball. At that time, nobody else could do it, so they banned it. They banned the dunk because he the only one. How could this guy get in the air and dunk like that? Everybody ooh and ah. They banned it, but that's art, right? He took the application of what they was doing to the next level. So I believe that our ability to do that becomes, you know, art, right? So people say, I'm not an artist, right? You just haven't perfected or got close to what your niche is, whatever it is you're doing, and you do it very, very well, it becomes as art in my mind. So as the mayor, we have a long way to go with all this stuff, you know, but at the end of the day, our job is to create opportunity and institutions that allow people to develop themselves to become the best artists that they can be.
Thank you. I want to close with just a final question, and it has to do with the site of A Call to Peace, the exhibition, which is Military Park, and whether you've had a shorter relationship with it or a longer relationship, to just hear each of you give share a little bit about what you see or don't see in that park. And of course, you know, as we've been talking about, one of the touchstones for this exhibition and that site is the historic Wars of America monument by Gudson Borglum, who is famed for making Mount Rushmore and also designing Confederate Stone Mountain. And as he was working on Confederate Stone Mountain, the granite from the quarry was brought up, and it lines the base of that sculpture here in Military Park. And just in many ways, as a sculptor, as that artwork, it kind of braids together a lot of the history of monuments, which is, in this country, Americana and white supremacy. And it's clearly not just a matter of the past, but playing out in our politics today. So a long way of saying, what is your sense of what you see or don't see in Military Park today?
Well, I'm probably the person on the panel who's had the shortest experience with Military Park, being here for this past year. And I walk through Military Park every day since January 7th. That's when I got here. And I think it's a pretty park. It's a beautiful park. And I was struck by this monument. However, walking through this park every day, I was struck with how it's not representative, it appeared to me, of this city. And this city has so much rich history from hundreds of years ago. and particularly what's happening now with the city and its transformation, and even its contemporary history from the 60s, 70s coming forward. There's an opportunity to tell another story or additional stories. And that's what I see missing when I walk through the park, and that it just does not have to be for a park that was just renovated and it's a beautiful park. I see people walking through this park every day, including myself. There's an opportunity to tell new stories, and how those stories are told, I think can just be completely untraditional with the activation of monuments in that park. I love the park. I look at it every day.
Thank you.
As a kid, it was completely irrelevant to me. The monument was just, a stone with some faces and pictures on it. I had no idea who they were, what was it about. I spent a lot of time at the Newark Museum as a kid, so I got a chance to see it. I took the bus. I went to University High School when it was a school down here on James Street in the factory with the holes in the wall. So I caught the 13, walked across, saw Military Park, saw Washington Park, and went up James Street to, the school every day. So I paid very, very, very little attention to those monuments that I saw there. It wasn't until I became older that I began to understand the presence of it, because people talk to you about it all the time. And all you see is this kind of sword and these faces, and you think that these people are paying homage to war, right? And you see all of these people there that don't look like anybody you know or anybody. We don't even learn about these people in school, so it becomes very, very obscure to me at this point. So it wasn't until in recent history that you began to understand all the things that you were just saying about, the complexity of the sculpture, the complexity of the guy who made the sculpture, and you begin to understand how small this country is and how small the history of this country is and how brief it is as well, right? Where there's thousands and thousands of years of history in other places, we have a very small amount of history in the scope of the world. You begin to look at it that way and see that there's so much more that can be said and so much more that needs to be said and done there. So I would agree that what was said, that there should be responses to these kind of things. It would even help us engage what is there as a young boy, a young African-American boy growing up in a city with parents who are probably more politically active than most people and culturally engaged than many people combined. I still had no real relationship with that monument, and I really still don't. So
I guess I'll just end quickly on, so hopefully we change your relationship and everyone's relationship, at least for a month. But I guess I want to say what's interesting about the park, and it's all paradoxical, which is America at its root, right? So on one hand, the park, actually, they do want people to go on the lawn. And my kids have been running on the grass in front of the statue, and a little girl came by and was like, can we go over? But you have to jump over the wall. But yes, you can do that, right? So on one hand, I really believe that it's a space that everyone can be part of and everyone can claim. But at the same time, there's a way in which the monuments themselves make you feel excluded from a park that you have a right to access. So that dichotomy from having the right to access it but feeling excluded is a kind of conundrum that citizens of color in the United States have felt from the very beginning, even though we legally didn't have the right to belong, right? So that's a more recent reality. The other thing I want to say about Military Park, to me, that's so fascinating is on one hand, we have this Borglum history in the Confederacy, but at the same time, and Paul and I talk about this in the newspaper, you also have it as a site where Northern soldiers met before they went down to defeat the Confederate soldiers in the South. It's a site where core activists met before going down south to protest legal segregation, right? So it's a park that actually had, and Manuel Acevedo's beautiful image that we've been using throughout part of A Call to Peace. It's a site of an anti-apartheid activism, right? So Military Park has a really rich history of like activism and protest and a contestation of power at the same moment that it's also celebrating a particular version of history. And that conflict, that coming together, that convergence and that paradox is kind of how I think about the park now. And my hope is that those of us who have power and those of us who believe in beauty actually win the war. Because there's a common phrase about the Civil War, right? That the North won the war, but the South won the peace. And our hope as activists, as citizens, as community members, as artists, is to make peace open, democratic, and inclusive of all of us, right? We want to win the peace as well. And so I'm hoping that we continue with all of us here in this room, but moving forward in these very perilous times to demand peace as a fundamental right of our belonging and citizenship.
Thank you, Linda Harrison, Mayor Baraka, and Salamisha Tillett. We're going to carry forward. We're going to hear from a few more folks. We're going to hear a poem, and the exhibition will begin.
Yes, we have a lot more. Yeah, so we have some speakers coming up. We would like, yes, Fahimi, you have the, okay, Marcia left. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you. So,
Okay, that was a wonderful conversation, right? Can we bring up Victor Dobson and Ann Englot from Express Newark to the stage?
Okay, that was a wonderful program, a wonderful conversation, and hopefully just the start to kick off this incredible month of exploring that monument and what is an appropriate monument for our time. I'm Ann Englot. I'm the co-director here at Express Newark, and I just have a few words, and we'll turn it over to Victor. We were the beneficiaries of the collective brilliance of our speakers and the folks who gathered together to create this day for us. And I just wanted to offer gratitude to them and acknowledge them and the great work that they did. Could we just have another round of applause? Thank you. And I'd also like to just take a moment to offer gratitude and acknowledge that Express Newark is on the traditional land of the Lenni Lenape, and we offer gratitude for that. And I also want to just honor and acknowledge the laborers and the enslaved, indentured, and disenfranchised and free people who built this city. As a historian of architecture, I'm often teaching about the people who designed buildings, but I think it's equally important to think about whose hands built the buildings, and I think that's something that we need to think about more and tell that history. Express Newark, for those of you who are not familiar with our space here, was originally conceptualized as a third space, an arts incubator for Newark artists, community residents, and Rutgers University Newark faculty, staff, and students to come together as we did today on equal footing and cultivate talent, scholarship, and artistic practice. And so it's entirely appropriate that this history is being called into question here, because Express Newark is the locus for democratic practice, where we can have difficult and transformative dialogues. And as Paul Robeson taught us, artists are the gatekeepers of truth, and we are civilization's radical voice. So now I'll just turn it over to Victor, who will say a few words.
So what is a timely monument for Newark? Dominating the center of Newark's downtown cultural district is this Wars of America, which is a really bold national statement that memorializes the Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I. Two facts animate my relationship with this monument. One, the absence of Native Americans and African Americans. Two, Burglam's proximity to the United Daughters of the Confederacy, specifically Helen Plain, who believed that the KKK saved us, in quotes, from the Negro domination, from Negro domination and carpetbag rule. If the intention of Wars of America was to elevate a collective of people, that collective did not include my community or family or me. Not unlike Kehinde Wiley's Rumor of War, unveiled in Times Square recently, and Carol Walker's Funds America, currently on view at the Tate Modern. A Call to Peace is an intervention that creates a space to revisit dreams deferred and to reimagine a timely monument for Newark. Thank you, Salamacia, Gillette. Thank you, Paul Farber. Thank you, Aaliyah Allen. Thank you, Fahimi Shakur. It seems like I've known you forever. Jamel Shabazz, Shikaya Booker. I hope Shikaya is here. Is she? Sonia Clark and Manuel Acevedo, who I've known as an emerging artist, probably give him his first show, for sharing your research, your engaged scholarship, and your future vision of what a timely Newark monument should look like. Thank you.
Now we'll turn it over to Marsha Brown.
So I get to be the last speaker, I hope, so that you guys can get out of here and go on the tour. I just want to say on behalf of the Office of the Chancellor and this university community that I think is helping to create the opportunity for revolutionary spaces to emerge in this city. There is a conspiracy afloat in this city, and we need to recognize that. The conspiracy of voices and messages that is calling us to make new choices about how people live in the world today. I know that every day now my heart has been heavy with the knowledge of the distance between those who have and the rest of the people that we might call, or Fanon called, the wretched of the earth. And we have to do something about that. And so this convergence that has been spoken of tonight between artists and the community, between art, between art and activism, there are a plethora of convergences that need to happen. But the question presented to you and I tonight is, how willing are we to be able to step into spaces that didn't exist before to create a new civic memory, to create a new opportunity, to create a new life vision for how we must live in the 21st century. And so I'm just going to close with a statement that Nelson Mandela made when he was released from prison after 35 years, and he became president of the country. And he said, the compelling question for our time is whether we are willing to create the democracy, the prosperity, and the peace that every human being deserves to have. And he ended it with this, which gives my heart a chill of just excitement. He said, we, you and I, must attempt to do what is even the impossible. So with that, my brothers and sisters, with my 60s mentality and aura begging me to Amanla and to Amani, I'm just going to say, power to the people.
Thank you, Marsha Brown. We have a few more speakers. We're continuing our conversation. We're having a conversation, right? Jessica Sechrist from Military Park.
I'm going to keep this really brief. Parks are supposed to create spaces for people to be and be seen and be heard, so you don't necessarily need to hear from me as a representative of the park, but as a steward of the second oldest park in the country, and a park which the bones of which were built when Newark had a very different makeup, and which the people whose voices and who were in power were very different than who they are today. We are so thankful for Monument Lab, for New Arts Justice, for Express Newark, for the city to bring these pieces into the park, to help us further our mission to be a park for Newarkers, not as it used to be, but as a new space where everyone is welcome to participate and to really be a space where people can be heard, can have a sense that they have some say in what the city should look like and what public art should be. And we are really looking forward to hosting these conversations as the monuments open, as the weather is hopefully not quite like it is today. It's a little warmer. People can come out, people can participate, people can say, this is what we want to happen. So we're just really grateful that we're able to be a part of this and a part of Newark, making sure that more people are being heard and are being represented in the city.
I hope you all will pick up copies of the newspaper over here, Call to Peace, which provides more information, more context about the exhibition. We have a couple of more speakers, and I want you to hear this poem by Jasmine Mans. It's about Newark, so sit tight, okay? Manuel Acevedo is going to share a few words about his portion.
Good afternoon. I didn't come prepared like my colleagues here, my friends. I do want to thank, first name basis, I want to thank Paul Telamisha, Nick Klein. Nick and I met on the subway, and somehow he remembered my work, and we kept in touch, and eventually he made the introduction to Monument Lab, Telamisha. Victor Dobson, Jessica, thank you, and Fayemi, and Aaliyah. So basically, I'm just going to contextualize the project. In the, I could say my earliest vision of that particular monument is in the 1970s, around 1974. I remember being in a station wagon that my father had purchased. There was a police station wagon that he got buffed and was painted in gold. And I was in the back seat, and my father always carried a weapon with him just in case. And I remember looking over and remember seeing police officers mounted on horses. And then kind of connecting that to the statue in some way. And then in the 80s, attending arts high school, I would walk through Military Park, and I became interested in this monument, but I couldn't connect to it. I was really interested in the way it was constructed, and I often thought of it as civilians fleeing wars, but then later I knew that the Wars of America was actually a call to arms representing 4 wars. The Revolutionary War, World War I, Civil War, as well as the 7-Year War. And eventually, I started to document that area. And my earliest documentation that I can remember is in 1986. I was hired by the city of Newark to document an anti-apartheid rally. And it culminated at the park, where this banner to end apartheid was wrapped around the actual monument and everyone was mounted on it. a couple months ago, I got an opportunity to revisit those negatives, and I forgot that I was on the mount. I was mounted on the monument as well, and I knew that because I had a bird's eye view of the park. So I said, okay, I must have been on this. I don't remember. It's only been 30 some odd years. So when I started to look into the history of Gustav Borglum, I realized a few things. One is that I didn't know who he was until I found out that he created Mount Rushmore, and I started to think about how can, as I started to document it and going back to the park, I needed to kind of confront this. And eventually, when I looked at, I started working on this concept of covering the monument in 2003, 2004. And as I learned about Gustav Borglum and his affiliation with the KKK, I was trying to figure out a way in which I could address his affiliation and thinking about the residents of Newark, my connection to the Puerto Rican and Black community, and feeling like that monument did not represent us. And as a result, I came up with this idea of cam up. Basically, it's to create a camouflage. The original concept was to cover it with mirrors where the light and color would absorb the surroundings, and the monument would disappear. And then by covering it, we would uncover his history. I basically refer to it more as hidden narratives in sight. And unfortunately, after almost 14 years of holding on to these drawings and these proposals, being approached by Monument Lab and having the opportunity to create something ephemeral I think is a good start to think about how we can decolonize America through its monuments, and thinking about fair representation. And we have the opportunity to unpack our history, and now we're ready for it. And just for your reference, you might want to consider the mayor in New York, the Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Makers has this great document. It's 42 pages, and basically it gives you an opportunity to think about how we can reckon with the power that represents the history in public, and understanding how history, how we can unpack history, how we can become more a part of our monuments, can include us, the complexity of our histories, and also the idea of justice. And there's so many variables in that. So I just want to thank Express Newark for making this opportunity happen, and I wish my fellow artists were here. But I'll see them hopefully on the 12th. I invite you to come on the 12th. I'll be temporarily modifying the monument, and there'll be 3 stages of it. And I should give you a little bit, but I think I'll leave it as a surprise. Do pick up A Call to Peace. Beautifully laid out. I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet, but I love the images, and this is one of my favorite images of children mounted on that monument in 1986. Thank you.
I think most of you know Newark is also a city of poets. So it's appropriate for me to call up Jasmine Mans. Can I have a mic stand for Jasmine?
How are we today? We're all right? I am very, very grateful and honored to stand before you and to share poetry with you today. So thank you kindly for inviting me. My name is Jasmine Mans. I am the poet in resident at the Newark Public Library. And the poem that I'm going to perform for you today was commissioned by our Mayor Raj J. Baraka. He asked me to write this piece, and he didn't tell me specifically what to write, but he asked me to write something in dedication to our city. And so I hope that you hear with clear ears about what this city is to me, and as a young person who grew up in this city all my life. And so I ask for your attention, your warmth, and thank you in advance. I know that Gloria Brown lives on South 14th Street in the South Ward. She serves as a lunch lady at George Washington Carver until she retires. At 12 p.m. every day, she gives Calvin Chambers an extra milk because he's my little brother's best friend and our next door neighbor. She feeds Calvin Chambers until he is old enough to go to high school. His older brother, Al Tariq, died somewhere in a high-speed police chase. His funeral was held at Cotton. Bergen Street stands like an old man who was an artist back in his day, but has since painted his kidneys a whiskey color. Around here, you don't need to be Muslim to say Assalamu alaikum, because when you go to King's Restaurant, there'll be a 4'11" black woman who will ask you for your God and your order, and she don't care if you've made up your mind yet. You got 10 seconds to respond. Assalamu alaikum, my sister. I'll go with catfish, cheese eggs, cheese grits, wheat toast with butter, jelly, and an Uptown, please. I come from a city that always had enough home to come home to. A city that holds its babies tight on the 27 bus because it's gonna be 4 more months before mama gets a new car, so back door bus driver, back door, we got places to go. The Source of Knowledge bookstore be the only black bookstore downtown. They'll tell you about Broad Street before all the white folks got here. It's summer 2020, and all of Benet and Tyrone's 3 black kids graduated from college. They keep their degrees in the china cabinet. When they cook, they wear those "my baby went to a good school" t-shirts. There's a mother in the West Ward praying her child through college. And sometimes she'll sing it, and other times she'll scream it, but that prayer is going to last her all of the days of her life. And the water ain't clean, but Joyce is. And she been clean for a minute now, got an apartment and sees her grandbabies every weekend. And the Leslie Street Block Association still has block parties. And they be a group of old black folks who never got too scared of their grandbabies to celebrate them or to pray for them. So Miss Shorter gonna have a cookout, Keisha gonna have a cookout, Uncle Charlie gonna have a cookout, and you ain't gonna worry about the roaches because mama said everybody gonna stay in that room and ain't nobody gonna move a muscle until she say so. And the street gonna be blocked off, and the city gonna dance, and Nana's gonna listen to trap music because all of her babies are in the same backyard at the same time, and the street gonna be blocked off. And your daddy gonna stop by, and he gonna bring you your new bike. And Nana made potato salad and mixed it with her whole arm. So you better stop by here now and come get you a plate. If I was thinking about monuments in Newark, I would think about my grandmother. I would also think about black women and the bodies of black women. And I'm learning so deeply, and I'm intrigued and saddened by how we have taken apart the bodies of many black women and never apologized throughout history. How we've extracted body parts from black women and cured diseases, and those women are in unmarked graves. And so if we want to talk about memorializing something and honoring something, I think we start with the black woman. And then I think if we want to continue to go into honoring things, I think it is important to remember that Newark belongs to black families, and that is something that we should see always and that we don't have. My name is Jasmine Mans. I am honored and always grateful to stand before my people, and thank you.